more love. Unforgettable. That's what God is. Whenever we are going about our day and something good happens, we may thank God. When we are going about our day and something that is challenging occurs, we may call out the name, oh God. But there are times in between where we pretend to forget who God is. And those are the times that we forget who we are. And in this awareness, I am reminded of the Upanishads, the Hindu text that speaks of this wonderful game that the Brahman has, the Brahma being the supreme God in that particular spirituality practice. And in this game of play, in this joyful bliss, there is a game that is going on that is this wonderful shadowing forth of the unmanifest as it comes into first manifestation, into first existence. And there is this wonderful game that it is playing with itself of forgetting itself as Vijnana. And as Vijnana, that being has forgotten that it is the Brahman. And the experience of manifestation is where we are. We may appear to be broken into little fragments and separated. We may appear to be subject to death. We may appear to be subject to movement in time and space, but in truth, we are not pushed from event to event by a chain of causation, but we are not harassed through emotions by some invisible necessity. We are expressions in matter. We are expressions of a life, and we are expressions of mind. And so the Satchitananda, which is the consciousness of bliss, and the Vijnana are the ways in which we call heaven and earth in these terms, in these days. And as we take on our earthly experience, as we take on our earthly personalities, we forget that we are one with Satchitananda, which is bliss. We forget that we are expressions of the Brahman. We forget that we are the essence of all of life, uniquely representing ourselves as our different personalities. Now, we have different opportunities to come into our awareness of our oneness in God, in our oneness with one another. We have different opportunities to come together in unity. Coming to a truth center like this is one such opportunity. Being in a day-to-day experience is giving us a number of opportunities to be aware of our oneness with God. In many of the greetings of the Hindu people, they do not shout hello or goodbye, but they say Ram Ram, or Om, or Hari Om, or Sai Ram. And they're basically saying the name of God to each other. They're acknowledging the presence of God every time they meet another being. And so when you're greeted by the word Siram, for example, that's not greeting the worldly body that you see, but the Sai in that person. We could use any name of God. It's the intention that counts. So when we are going about our business on the Dan Ryan and Sai happens to get very close to our car, do we remember that that is Sai in the next car? Do we remember when the children are not behaving in the way that we would have them, that that child too is Sai? Do we remember when any person is impressing their particular force or will upon us in a way that is not suitable to our liking? Do we forget that that too is Sai? We have many opportunities for reunions. And reunions are a beautiful thing. Reunions are the way that we come back into our unity. I haven't been to any of my reunions. I went to one reunion at USC several years later. It wasn't like of the whole class, but it was like of a certain group of people that I worked with in some on-campus activities. But I went to a sort of a mini reunion this week. And I didn't think about the fact that it was related to this particular topic until after the fact. But in that reunion, we were remembering when we were children. Because these are people that I went to kindergarten through like 8th grade with. Many of them I hadn't seen for 42 years. But it was interesting when I thought about it in retrospect. Nobody was attempting to be anything else than what they were, because there was no sense in doing that, because we already knew who each other are in essence. And the beautiful part about reunions and reuniting is that you are sharing remembrances of different activities and events and different behaviors. And when we were sharing that, there was much joy in it because we had a sense of being alike. We had a sense of being one. We had a sense of having a shared experience, and therefore we felt more comfortable. And I'll say I felt, because I can only speak for me. I felt more comfortable in being who I am because I had an affirmation that the experience that I was having wasn't simply in my mind, but one that was shared. And so we had that same kind of unity when we were in our Energy of Money class on Wednesday nights at my home. And there were 9 of us who were going through this journey, 10 of us who were going through this journey, who were embarking on a new way of seeing what our energies are doing and how our energies are being spent or distributed, and how we get to choose the ways in which we can show up for ourselves in alignment with that which is of most importance to us. And that goes beyond, you know, whatever it is in the checking account, whatever it is in the pocket. It goes into like physical vitality, and it goes into your relationships, and it goes into how the different ways that we leak our energy out, and how there's different sludge that comes into our awareness. And it brings us into a way of making intentions to be in alignment with our highest and best good, and the highest and best good of all concerned, because we often forget who we are, and we get an opportunity through our classes and our spiritual practices, just as our vision states, to become in alignment with who we really are. Now, when you are going through different experiences that are seemingly unfriendly, you have an opportunity to choose unity. We have an opportunity to choose to see each other as one. We have an opportunity to see each other as one family. We have an opportunity to see each other as one community here at the Oneness Spiritual Center. We have an opportunity to see ourselves as one possible way that God is happening. And so even as we greet our new visitors, even as we greet each other in our workplaces, even as we greet each other in our family gatherings, even as some of our youth are graduating and coming together with their friends in some ways for the last time, and in other ways for a new insight as a being who has now entered into another realm of living that is post-high school, that is post-secondary training, that is a new way of seeing themselves, some as adults, some as a knowledgeable person, some as one who has attained a goal. But each one of us become part of a shared community every time we come into an event where we are crossing a threshold, where we are moving into a greater awareness of our power. And we move into a greater awareness of our power because we remember that we are spiritual beings. We are not simply human beings having a spiritual experience. You know, there are many ways that we get to remember. And Ernest Holmes tells us on page 308 that spirituality is natural goodness. God is not a person. God is a presence personified in us. Spirituality is not a thing. It is the atmosphere of God's presence, goodness, truth, and beauty. Religion is a life, a living. If we could forget that philosophy is profound, that religion is spiritual and life serious, all of which may be true, but if we could forget all those things and approach reality as normally as we go about our daily affairs, we would be better off. Now, whatever ideas that you may have about what spirituality is or what religion is, really pale in comparison to what it is to focus on the ultimate reality. You have wonderful opportunities like meditation to give you a foundation so that you're realizing that just in the intention of communing with God, that everything about you is reconfiguring. Your cells are reconfiguring. Your thoughts are reconfiguring. Your energy is being requalified. There are different ways that are transformative when we come into this communion, this conscious communion with the infinite. And so we have to really remember that none of us are happy being finite. When you think, oh, this is all the money I've had, this is all of the career that I've had, this is all of the relationship that I've had, when the money runs out or the relationship ends or whatever it is, the activity that we are enjoying came to an end, whether it was being in a fitness race or whatever it was that comes to an end, we're not happy because it's over. Even though we're happy to even graduate from high school, we're not necessarily happy that the experiences that we could be assured of are over. We are not happy that that particular relationship is now taking a different dimension. And so we're really not happy with the idea of being finite, because it's not our nature to be finite. It is our nature to be infinite. But if we start getting attached to personalities, then we forget that there is nothing about the true essence of who we are that is personality. Yes, it may give us some solace when we are recognizing ourselves as doctor, as chef, as auditor, as teacher, or whatever those particular activities that you have been participating in, they are not defining who you are, because as a spiritual being, there is no end to what your possibilities may be. So when you are really open and aware that you are mind, that you are beyond personality, then you may begin to embrace more than you have ever even imagined. Because when you open yourself up to be in communion with God, then you are no longer trapped by who you were. And you are now at the doorway of who you are yet to be. Now, Ernest Holmes also tells us that personal identity, of course, postulates memory, which binds into one sequence the old life and the new. This means that man must carry with him, after the experience of physical death, a complete remembrance, for it is to this alone that we must look for the link that binds one event to another, making life a continuous stream of self-conscious expression. To suppose that man can forget and still maintain a self-conscious identity is to suppose that one could cut off his entire past without destroying the logical sequence of personality. Remembrance alone guarantees personality. And so it's really not about being attached to the past. It's really not about even being attached to a memory. But what we're really, really infinitely one with is the feeling that brought us into the experience. The spiritual dimension of us that is our wisdom that called forth those sequences of experiences so that we could grow, develop, and unfold, so that our soul may awaken to its true essence. And everyone who has helped to facilitate this process along the way, they too have been Sai, they too have been Ram, they too have been the presence of Om, they too have been the presence of God, of the Father who is ever looking out for us and ever seeing itself in and through us. And every time we turn to it, just as the story of the prodigal son, every time we turn to it, it opens its arms. Metaphysically, it opens its arms and greets us with love, and absolute unconditional love that doesn't care where you've been, that doesn't care that you were eating less than what the pigs were eating, doesn't care of all the things that others might term immoral. It doesn't care about what you have done, because it sees you as pure, as perfect, and as complete, because it sees you as itself. And because there is only one of us here, there can only be perfection and completeness. At my little mini reunion that we had over at the Maple Tree Inn the other night, I was sharing that I had been to the funeral of our priest who had been our pastor at the Catholic church that we went to and that was attached to our school, our community. And one of my friends said, well, why would you go to his funeral? I said, well, you know, he was good to our family, he was kind, and, you know, when my aunt made her transition, you know, he was there, and, you know, I just thought it would be great. It was like, you know, a room full of people, and there were like no seats. And conversation kind of went on, you know, and he was always trying to eat at our house, or whatever. And I said, yeah, you know, they started kind of going down a different road that was a little disparaging, and I was like, well, you know, he marched with Martin Luther King. And they said, well, what does that have to do with him being a molester? And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. I only knew the good about him. And they proceeded to tell me how they'd seen it on TV, and that's why he'd come to our community, our parish, and so forth and so on. But it didn't change how I felt about him. It didn't change how I perceived him. I knew that at the very core of his essence that there is a being who was there in service to love. That there was a being who was in service to humanity. And if you listen to all of the things that he had accomplished in terms of being of service in the world for the many years that he was on the planet, it did not diminish his capacity to love by being accused or perhaps even guilty of these particular acts. Now, I didn't know that this would be the case with me. You know, I can remember situations of being with other people where I had to remember what they did. In another situation back in Los Angeles, another person I knew had been accused of such a thing, but it wasn't until after I was in the process of hugging him, I said, oh, he's that person. And I remembered, instead of my natural inclination to hug him, I started remembering what he had done. And I thought, oh, that was interesting, because he is still the person that I perceived him to be, even as his behavior indicated otherwise. And so we have an opportunity to know that that presence that is within us is ever loving us unconditionally. That presence that is within us is ever seeing each one of its creations as perfect. And when we decide that one personality is not deserving of our love, then we become separate from our spiritual self. We become separate from our essence. We have turned away from the Father because we, like the prodigal son, have decided that this life that I am living is not satisfactory to me. I need to go elsewhere to pursue a life that will bring me more fulfillment. And for a time when we are perceiving that we are separate from the Father, although we can never be, when we are perceiving that we are separate from the Father, everything about us yearns to return back to the Father. And the same thing happens whether that person is a father or a child of a father who is seemingly abandoned, seemingly from a broken home, seemingly from a torn apart family. That child that yearns for the father may put on the behavior like, I don't need him. He wasn't there for me, and therefore I don't need to ever have a relationship with him. And we see, like on the Oprah show and in other situations where that has been probed into, that even though they may have never met the Father or met him on occasion, that there was an aspect of really wanting his presence to be near. There is something about us that wants that energy that we have been infused with, even if it was just genetics, even if it was just some kind of hereditary imprint. It's the same kind of longing, it's the same kind of yearning that we have to be one with the presence of God. And so even though we may not even have a relationship with our biological father or the father who raised us or whomever we term to be daddy, even though we may not have a relationship with him, we still want to please him. We still want him to find favor in us. We still want him to think that we are deserving of his love. We still want him to think that we are someone who he should be proud of. We are still thinking that this presence is something that will make us feel complete. Because when we know at the very essence of our being, in our heart space, that there's a place within us that only that presence can feel, then we know that we have never ever been separated from him in the first place. And so for anyone who is feeling any kind of disparaging feelings about their father, or for anyone who is feeling some kind of missing or yearning for their father, know that, lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the earth. So there is this great opportunity that we have as we explore this topic in the monthly theme, the Father's presence. And it is an opportunity for us to know and grow in love. It is an opportunity for us to see that in every minute of the day, we can turn to the Father. We can go back. If we've spent up all our money, if we've been living riotous living, whatever the case may be, there are open arms that are always available, always accessible for us and to us. And in this access to unconditional love, we may know that we are safe, we may know that we are secure, we may know that we are absolutely protected, that God itself is safety. We may know that regardless of whatever may be happening in the school closing and whatever may be happening in the shootings that are occurring on the streets, that there is a presence that will ever be available, even as we are dreading this thing called death, as if it could ever end that relationship, because it cannot. Even if we were to assume that death was anything other than releasing a body that no longer serves, even if we can know that if our father is deceased, that all it was him releasing this body temple that no longer served him, if you were to think of going to a Goodwill center and you were releasing something that no longer serves you, you wouldn't stand there going, oh, my t-shirt, oh, it's gone now. You would absolutely know that there was something that had served you that was going on to serve someone else a greater purpose, and you would know that the energy of unconditional love that was always present within you would now be present inside of that person that is receiving that t-shirt. Just so we know that as we release someone onto their next relationship, onto their next dimension of living, onto their next set of experiences, that they will forever live in our hearts. Because we get the feeling of bliss for simply knowing the many treasured moments that we've had with them, even if they were only in our imaginings. Because really the mind doesn't know what actually happened in terms of behavior and physical experience. It doesn't know the difference between that and what you imagine that never physically happened in your body. So you get an opportunity to know that there is a great, grand, and glorious way that this reunion is ever happening in your heart. That every moment you have an opportunity to revisit the Father's presence and to remember that wonderful bliss of reuniting. And it feels so good. And you get an opportunity to choose many more of those moments. You get an opportunity to know those things that are desirable. As Ernest Holmes tells us, should we learn to contemplate those things which are desirable and to forget the rest, we would soon overcome fear through faith. And this is how we build faith. This is how we remember that the presence is available. So I invite you to know that spirituality goes beyond any structure, any framework. It is absolutely the very essence of who you are. And I invite you to know that this personality that you identify yourself with is not the truth of who you are, but the personality of who you are can take on many forms, can take on many incarnations, and can take on many expressions, and that you are not limited by that which has been finite in your experience. And lastly, I want you to remember to think on those things that bring you joy, to think on those things that have the potential to bring you greater joy, so that you can ever be reunited in the bliss of reuniting with your own very spirit. And remembering who you are or you are masquerading to be something other than that very essence, know that you are forever loved, forever cherished, and celebrate each moment of reunion. Namaste.
Namaste.